Everything you were taught about vegetable gardening might be wrong. Not all of it, but more than you think. Most people believe the ground is where real gardening happens. Bigger space, deeper soil. That must mean bigger vegetables, right? Not always. There are vegetables that actually struggle in the ground. They fight poor drainage. They battle soil-borne pests. They get crowded out, dried out, or eaten before they even have a chance. And then, almost by accident, someone moves that same vegetable into a container, and it thrives. Bigger harvests, cleaner produce, fewer problems, less work. This isn't a gimmick. It's not a trend. It's simple plant science. When you grow certain vegetables in containers, you control the soil, you control the drainage, you control the moisture, you keep pests from ever reaching the roots in the first place. And for a lot of vegetables, that control makes all the difference. Today we're covering 8 vegetables that grow better in containers than they ever will in the ground. Some of these will surprise you. One of them might completely change how you think about your garden. And the last one on this list, the one most gardeners save for a raised bed or a big open row, might be the biggest surprise of all. Experienced gardeners who have been growing food for decades are often shocked when they finally try it in a pot. Stick around, because we're building up to it. Quick thing before we dive in. If you're new here, this channel is all about growing more food with less struggle, no matter how much space you have. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming, and let's get into it. Let's start with vegetable number 1, and it's one almost everyone struggles with at some point. Vegetable number 1, broccoli. Vegetable number 1 on our list is broccoli, and broccoli has a reputation. Ask any home gardener how their broccoli turned out, and you'll usually hear a sigh before an answer. The common belief is that broccoli needs a big garden bed with plenty of open ground to spread its roots. That's what most seed packets show. Rows of broccoli, spaced far apart, planted directly in the earth. Here's the problem. Broccoli is picky about temperature and moisture. If the soil gets too warm, or dries out even for a day or two, broccoli reacts by bolting. That means it shoots up a flower stalk instead of forming that tight, delicious head you were hoping for. Once it bolts, that's it. The plant is basically done producing anything worth eating. In-ground soil is harder to control. It heats up in the sun, it dries out unevenly, and ground-dwelling pests like cabbage worms and root maggots have direct access to your broccoli's roots. This is where containers change everything. In a container, you control the soil temperature by simply moving the pot into partial shade during a heat wave. You control moisture with consistent watering, instead of hoping the ground holds enough. And because the plant is elevated off the earth, common ground pests have a much harder time reaching it. Container-grown broccoli tends to form tighter, more uniform heads. The roots stay cooler because quality potting mix drains and breathes better than compacted garden soil. And harvesting is easier too, since you're not bending down into a crowded row. If you want to try this yourself, look for a container at least 5 gallons in size, though a 15 to 20 gallon container will give you room for a couple of plants. Broccoli wants 6 or more hours of direct sun a day. Water consistently, and try to keep the soil evenly moist rather than letting it dry out between waterings. A balanced, slow-release fertilizer worked into the soil at planting time will feed the plant through its whole growing season. The most common beginner mistake with container broccoli is using a container that's too small. Broccoli has a deeper root system than people expect, so give it room to stretch down, not just out. But that's only part of the story. Because vegetable number 2 has almost the exact same problem as broccoli, but for a completely different reason. Vegetable number 2, kale. Vegetable number 2 on our list is kale. You've probably heard that kale is nearly impossible to kill. And in some ways that's true. Kale is tough. It survives frost. It survives neglect. It survives beginner mistakes that would wipe out other crops. So why would kale grow better in a container? Here's what surprises most gardeners. Kale's biggest enemy isn't the weather. It's insects, specifically the kind that live in soil and leaf litter right at ground level. Flea beetles, cabbage loopers, and slugs all treat in-ground kale like an all-you-can-eat buffet, because they can crawl right up from the soil onto the leaves without ever being noticed. In a container, especially one raised up on a stand or a patio, kale is physically separated from a huge portion of the pests that would normally destroy it. Slugs in particular have a much harder time reaching a plant that isn't sitting directly on damp earth. Container growing also gives you cleaner kale. Ground-grown kale often gets splashed with soil and mud every time it rains, which means more washing before you can eat it. Container-grown kale, especially with a layer of mulch on top of the soil, stays remarkably clean. For container kale, a 10 to 15-gallon pot works well for 2 or 3 plants. Kale likes full sun but will tolerate partial shade better than most vegetables on this list, which makes it forgiving for smaller patios that don't get sun all day. Keep the soil consistently moist, and feed it every few weeks with a balanced liquid fertilizer once it's established. The biggest mistake gardeners make with kale, in the ground or in a container, is not harvesting the outer leaves often enough. Kale actually produces more when you pick regularly. Many gardeners eventually discover that the more they harvest, the more the plant rewards them. Now, here's vegetable number 3, and it completely changes the rules, because most gardeners assume it needs endless space to spread. Vegetable number 3, zucchini. Vegetable number 3 on our list is zucchini. If you've ever grown zucchini in the ground, you already know the problem. It takes over. Those vines sprawl in every direction, taking up more space than almost any other vegetable in the garden. And despite all that space, zucchini plants grown directly in the ground are famous for 2 frustrating issues: powdery mildew and squash vine borers. Powdery mildew is a fungus that thrives in the still, humid air close to the ground, especially when leaves stay damp from soil moisture and poor airflow. Squash vine borers are worse. They're a moth larva that burrows directly into the base of the stem, and by the time you notice the damage, the plant is usually already dying. Here's what surprises most gardeners. Growing zucchini in a container, especially a compact or bush variety, solves both of these problems almost completely. Containers elevate the plant, improving airflow around the leaves and reducing the humid, stagnant conditions that powdery mildew loves. And because you control the growing medium in a container, you can avoid the kind of damp, decaying organic matter at soil level that attracts vine borer moths in the first place. There's another benefit too. Container zucchini plants are far easier to inspect. You can check the base of the stem every few days without crawling through a tangle of vines, which means you catch problems early instead of discovering them too late. Choose a container that's at least 15 to 20 gallons, and look specifically for compact or bush zucchini varieties bred for container growing rather than the sprawling vine types. Zucchini needs full sun, at least 6 to 8 hours a day, and it's a hungry, thirsty plant, so water deeply and feed every couple of weeks during peak growing season. The most common beginner mistake is planting zucchini too early in cool soil, which stunts the roots before the plant ever gets going. Wait until the soil has properly warmed up in spring. Few gardeners realize it, but vegetable number 4 actually prefers the exact opposite growing conditions of zucchini, which is exactly why it does so well in a pot. Vegetable number 4, peas. Vegetable number 4 on our list is peas. Peas seem simple. Stick them in the ground, give them something to climb and wait. But ask around, and you'll hear the same complaint over and over: peas that germinate unevenly, or rot before they even sprout. The problem is usually drainage. Peas are surprisingly sensitive to soggy soil, especially early in their life when the seed is germinating. In-ground garden soil, particularly clay-heavy soil, holds water longer than peas can tolerate. The seed sits in cold, wet earth and simply rots before it ever gets the chance to sprout. This is where containers give peas a huge advantage. A good quality potting mix drains far more predictably than garden soil. You get even moisture without waterlogging, which means far better, more consistent germination. Container-grown peas also warm up faster in spring, since containers heat up quicker than the ground. That means you can often start your peas earlier in the season and get an earlier harvest, sometimes weeks ahead of your neighbors growing peas directly in garden beds. For peas, a container around 12 inches deep is enough, since their root systems are relatively shallow. Give them a trellis or some stakes to climb, because peas are natural climbers and will produce more when they can grow upward rather than sprawl. They like full sun to partial shade, and cooler temperatures suit them best, which is why so many gardeners plant them in early spring. Water regularly, but avoid letting the container sit in standing water. The most common mistake with peas is planting them too densely. Give each plant a little breathing room and you'll get stronger vines and a better harvest. You might be surprised by what comes next, because vegetable number 5 is a close relative of broccoli and kale, but it fails in the ground for a completely different reason. Vegetable number 5, cabbage. Vegetable number 5 on our list is cabbage. Cabbage has a reputation for being a garden bully. It's a heavy feeder, meaning it pulls a huge amount of nutrients out of the surrounding soil. In the ground, cabbage often competes with nearby plants for those nutrients, and if your native soil isn't rich to begin with, cabbage heads end up small, loose, and disappointing. There's also the issue of cabbage root maggots, a soil-dwelling pest that specifically targets cabbage and its relatives at the root level. Once they're in your garden soil, they're notoriously difficult to get rid of, and they can wipe out an entire row of cabbage in a single season. Containers solve both problems at once. You control exactly what's in the soil, which means you can give your cabbage rich, nutrient-dense potting mix without competing with anything else. And because that soil has never hosted a garden pest before, cabbage root maggots simply aren't there to begin with. Container cabbage also tends to form tighter, denser heads, because the plant isn't stretching its roots wide, searching for scattered nutrients. Everything it needs is close and concentrated. Use a container that's at least 5 gallons per plant, though bigger is better if you want larger heads. Cabbage wants full sun and consistent moisture, since inconsistent watering can cause the heads to split. Feed it regularly with a nitrogen-rich fertilizer early in the season, then switch to a balanced feed as the head begins to form. Many gardeners eventually discover that overwatering cabbage right before harvest is a common mistake. Too much water at the wrong time can cause the heads to crack open just as they're finally ready to pick. We're halfway through, and if any of this is landing for you, tap that like button. It genuinely helps a small channel like this one reach more gardeners, and it takes 2 seconds. Vegetable number 6 loves containers for a reason most people overlook completely, and it has nothing to do with pests. Vegetable number 6, beets. Vegetable number 6 on our list is beets. Beets are one of those vegetables that seem foolproof until you pull them up and find tiny misshapen roots instead of the smooth, round beets you were picturing. The real problem with in-ground beets is usually soil compaction. Beets are a root vegetable, which means they need loose, uncompacted soil to expand properly underground. Most garden soil, especially clay-heavy soil common across the US, UK, and Australia, is naturally denser than beets prefer. As the root tries to grow, it hits resistance, and the result is small, woody, or twisted beets. This is where containers give beets a real advantage. A quality potting mix stays loose and light throughout the entire growing season, giving the developing root plenty of room to expand evenly in every direction. There's a bonus here too. Container-grown beets are far easier to harvest. Instead of digging through compacted ground and risking damage to the roots, you can simply loosen the potting mix and lift the beets out cleanly. For beets, choose a container at least 12 inches deep, since the roots need vertical room to grow. Beets prefer full sun but tolerate a little afternoon shade in hotter climates. Keep the soil consistently moist, since inconsistent watering leads to tough, woody beets. A phosphorus-rich fertilizer at planting time helps encourage strong root development. The most common beginner mistake is planting beet seeds too close together. Each beet seed is actually a small cluster of seeds, so thinning your seedlings after they sprout is essential, or you'll end up with a crowded container and small competing roots. Vegetable number 7 completely changes the rules again because it's not really about the roots at all. It's about the leaves. Vegetable number 7, Swiss chard. Vegetable number 7 on our list is Swiss chard. Swiss chard is often treated as a background vegetable, something people grow almost as an afterthought. But if you've ever struggled with chard bolting early or turning bitter in the heat, the problem usually comes down to soil temperature. In the ground, soil temperature swings widely with the weather. A sudden heat wave can push soil temperatures high enough to stress the plant, which triggers early bolting and bitter-tasting leaves. Once chard bolts, the quality of the harvest drops fast. Containers give you a level of control that ground soil simply can't match. You can move a container into shade during a heat spell, protecting the roots from a temperature spike that would otherwise stress the plant in the ground. That single ability, moving the plant, is something you can never do with an in-ground crop. Container-grown chard also tends to produce more consistently over a longer season, because the stable root environment keeps the plant from experiencing the stress that leads to bolting. A container around 10 gallons works well for 2 to 3 chard plants. Chard tolerates a range of light conditions, from full sun to partial shade, which makes it one of the more forgiving vegetables on this list. Keep the soil evenly moist and feed every few weeks with a balanced fertilizer to support continuous leaf production. The biggest mistake gardeners make with chard is harvesting the entire plant at once instead of picking outer leaves as needed. Like kale, chard rewards regular harvesting with continued production throughout the season. And now, vegetable number 8, the one we've been building up to, the one that surprises even experienced gardeners who've been growing food for years. Vegetable number 8, okra. Vegetable number 8 on our list, the final one, is okra. Most gardeners assume okra needs a big open row in the ground, with plenty of space and deep native soil to support its tall, sturdy stalks. That assumption makes sense on the surface. Okra can grow several feet tall, and it looks like a plant that needs room to anchor itself. But here's what surprises most gardeners, even ones who have been growing vegetables for decades. Okra actually thrives in containers, and in many cases, it outproduces in-ground okra entirely. The secret is soil temperature. Okra originated in warm climates and absolutely loves heat, more than almost any other vegetable on this list. The problem with in-ground okra, especially in cooler regions of the US, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and even parts of Australia, is that garden soil often doesn't warm up fast enough or hold enough heat to keep okra truly happy. Containers, especially dark-colored ones, absorb and hold heat far more efficiently than open garden soil. That extra warmth around the root zone is exactly what okra craves, and it can mean the difference between a handful of pods all season and a container that keeps producing continuously for months. There's another advantage too. Because containers drain more efficiently than most garden soil, okra's roots stay healthier and less prone to rot, even during periods of heavy rain, which is a real risk for in-ground okra in humid climates. For container okra, choose a container that's at least 15 to 20 gallons, since okra has a deep taproot, despite its manageable height when grown in containers. Give it full sun, the more the better, since okra genuinely loves heat and light. Water deeply, but allow the top of the soil to dry slightly between waterings, since okra doesn't like sitting in constantly soggy soil. Feed it regularly through the growing season with a balanced fertilizer to support continuous pod production. The most common mistake with okra, in containers or in the ground, is letting the pods grow too large before picking. Okra pods become tough and woody almost overnight, so check your plants every day or two once they start producing, and harvest the pods while they're still small and tender. That's all 8. Broccoli, kale, zucchini, peas, cabbage, beets, Swiss chard, and okra. All vegetables that, for very different reasons, do better in a container than they ever do in the open ground. Here's the bigger idea behind all of this. Growing more food isn't really about having a bigger garden. It never was. It's about creating better growing conditions, wherever you happen to be gardening. A small patio with the right containers can outproduce a large garden bed with the wrong soil. That's not a trick. That's just how plants respond to the environment you give them. You don't need acres of land to grow real food. You need the right container, the right soil, and a little bit of attention. That's something almost anyone can do, whether you've got a big backyard or just a sunny balcony. So here's what I'd love to know. Which of these 8 vegetables have you already grown successfully in a container? And if you're planning to try one of these for the first time this season, tell us which one you're most excited about down in the comments. I read every one. This channel grows because of people like you. Not big budgets or fancy equipment. So if this video saved you some trial and error, do 3 quick things. Give it a like, so more gardeners searching for this kind of help can actually find it. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications.
Look at this one.
So you don't miss the next video. And if you know someone who's been fighting with their vegetable garden, someone who could really use an easier way, send this their way. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. Thanks for spending this time with me, and I'll see you in the next one.